Hi, welcome to another IELTS video. In this video, we're going to review the submissions made to last week's speaking contest. Students were asked to speak for 1 to 2 minutes on a topic that was recently seen in Jordan, and this is part 2 of the speaking test. So the students responded to two prompts given on a cue card. In this video, we will listen to each of the student responses, and I will provide an assessment based on the IELTS Speaking Band Descriptors chart, which can be accessed at IELTS.org. So before we get started, let's have a read of the cue card as seen recently in Jordan. Describe a person you know who made a good decision. Who is this person? What was their decision, and why do you feel it was positive? What resulted from their decision? Okay, so I'll just do them in the order that I received them, the order they were posted to this blog. So the first entry that we were going to look at was submitted by Annabelle. Okay, and here is Annabelle's submission.
I know many people who made good decisions in life. One of them is my husband. My husband is the same age as me, about 30-year-old. He is very tall, has blonde hair. He enjoys football and like extreme sport such as skydiving and bungee jump. His decision was to leave his job and his house in England and to move to Australia and travel for 2 years. He wanted to see the wonderful sights in New Zealand, the Philippines, and Australia. I also went there and traveled in Australia for about a year before he came along. I think it's very funny because we both come from 2 different countries and we happen to meet each other on the other side of the world. What resulted from this decision is that we fell in love and we are now married. We moved to the UK and we are currently building our family life together.
Okay, so Annabelle's submission was fairly good in many different areas, as I'm sure you could hear. I felt that her pronunciation and intonation particularly were impressive. So as you hear, as she's finishing her thoughts, her intonation is coming down. And she paces her speaking very well. She's not speaking too quickly. She's not speaking unnaturally slowly, I don't feel. There are no extended unnatural pauses, so that's good. So I think that there are lots of good things going on here. Now, I'll just point out that the response seems to spend a bit of time describing certain things that I don't think are really in keeping with what the cue card is asking. So Annabelle tells us a bit about what her husband looks like, which, I mean, I suppose that could set a bit of the scene, but I think that when you're in the exam, you have 2 minutes to talk about a very specific topic, so you don't want to start going off on too many tangents. And grammatically speaking, there were a few small issues. So we would say that her husband was 30 years old, not 30-year-old. He likes extreme sports not he like extreme sports. And Annabelle, please be careful and watch your parallelism, because there was one point I think you're talking about skydiving and bungee, and I think you use bungee jump, but because you frame it skydiving, you should be using bungee jumping to keep them sort of both consistent in structure. Okay, so now I've made a few notes here. Okay, I thought that perhaps you could have used the word positive, because if we just look back up to our cue card, so it asks specifically what was their decision and why do you feel it was positive, and you do definitely frame that it was a good decision. But I feel if you could have tied it just a little bit more tightly, to this part of the question, that might have been helpful in kind of rounding out the answer a little bit. Let's see. Okay, I think I've hit all the bases that I wanted to in terms of responding to what you've put here. So let me share a few of the scores. Now I'm looking at the IELTS Speaking Band Descriptors chart, and for fluency and coherence, I felt that you were at about a band 7 or 7.5. I thought that you spoke very fluently. The coherence was there. I didn't find, at any time I wasn't really straining to try to understand what you were saying at all. So that was there. So that's good. I think that's a solid 7.5 there. Now the lexical resources I thought were also quite good. And I also would place that at about a 7.5. So you use some idiomatic language, which is good. I think at one point you describe something as kind of funny, and I know that you don't mean it's humorous. You meant more it's funny because it was ironic that you and your husband from two different countries ended up in Australia and met each other there. So I thought that was quite impressive. Okay, as far as grammatical range and accuracy, I also placed this at about a 7. As I mentioned before, there were those few mistakes, and I think if we were to clean those up a little bit, that your mark there would very easily jump to a band 8 or higher. And then finally, your pronunciation and intonation. I'm going to say this is about an 8. I think that your pronunciation was very good. I was impressed by the intonation. You might want to just speed up a little bit, and I hesitate saying that because I don't want you to start to think that you have to speak fast, because that's not what we want to do. But I definitely felt like see, the pace was good. It was easy to understand, but it could have just been a slight bit more rapidly delivered. Okay, so good. So we're looking at pretty much 7.5 across in pronunciation, about an 8. I think overall you would likely score 7.5 as an overall speaking band for that performance. So thanks very much for that, Annabelle. Now let's continue on to Mr. Bashir. And Bashir, I'm not exactly sure how to say your first name. I think it's Ijaz. So we'll listen to his response here.
It is necessary for a good decision maker that he must be able to weigh all available options in a decision making process. He must be shrewd to see the outcome of his decision, and he must be able to utilize all his knowledge and experience during a decision making. My current business manager, Mr. Naseem Ahmed, have all these acumen, and he is professionally a pharmacist and on the helm of affair of a pharmaceutical company, and I am his subordinate there. Last year, our company gave us a project that we have to increase the manufacturing capacity of our plant, and in that project they appointed Mr. Naseem Ahmed as a head, and I assisted him in that process. In that project we had to make a number of critical decisions. In such a decision we had to decide that either we go for a big single manufacturing vessel for liquid products, or we had option at that time that we can choose two segregated and little small vessels for the same process. But Mr. Naseem Ahmed at that time decided to opt for a big single vessel, and in now it has been proved that his decision was very good and successful, because now we have extra space for our future expansion in the same facility, and now we are utilizing less energy. We can conserve our energy by operating a single vessel instead of two, and it is to process in a single vessel is far more easy than to process the same liquid in two vessels.
Okay, so I thought that there were certain things that are positive about that response. So for one, Ijaz, you seem to steer the topic towards something that you are an expert in, because I can tell by the vocabulary that you're using that this is not the first time you've talked about this subject. So I think that that's a good strategy to use. But the one thing is just be sure that you're still in keeping with what the cue card is asking of you, because I felt that towards the end it starts to become quite technical, and I'm not sure if we're still talking about, a person making a good decision. I don't know other people listening what their opinion is, but that's the way that I felt. I felt it kind of detoured a little bit and became quite technical. As far as the manner in which you deliver the monologue, I think it's a little monotone. So I was making the comment before that Annabelle was, coming to conclusions and dropping her intonation, so dropping down. When I finish my idea, I finish it. And it makes it much easier for the listener to sort of follow where one idea stops and another begins. So as I'm listening to you, I'm having a little bit of trouble picking out, when you're sort of finishing one idea and moving on to the next. So that would be a key thing that I would work on if I were you. There are a few somewhat unnatural pauses, and I feel sometimes you roll over vocabulary very quickly, which makes it hard to pick out exactly what it is you're saying. Okay. And I think then if I just go back to what the actual task was, I think in your response you're talking about a decision that you made with another person together, but the task is it clearly says that it's supposed to be about a person who made a good decision. So I'm not sure how close the response is in keeping with the cue card. And towards the end, so yeah, I just mentioned that it kind of gets into tech talk. There's no real conclusion either. I didn't feel that you kind of wrap it up at all at the end. So anyway, let me go through the different breaths and give you a bit of feedback there. So for fluency and coherence, I think you seem to be very fluent in the vocab that you're using, because I think you use this vocabulary a lot. It's your work-related vocabulary, so that's fairly good. But the coherence itself is weak, because at times I really have trouble. I have to strain, and I had to listen to the recording several times to pick out certain things that you're talking about. So for example, I think at the beginning you're talking about a grand business manager, but the first time and the second time that I listened to it, I thought you were talking about your grandfather. So you have to, slow things down, just nice, easy, calm pace. You don't have to cram everything into 20 seconds. You can spread it out a little bit. Take your time in delivering the response. So I would say that fluency and coherence is probably about a 5.5. The lexical resources, as I mentioned, they were pretty good. The only issue is that the incoherence hurts it a little bit, because a lot of the stronger vocabulary that you're using, your listener doesn't even pick up on it, because they can't really pick these words out of what you're saying. So I think that the lexical resources, if you were to speak slowly and clearly, they could place at 7.5. But the problem is that the words themselves don't actually come to the forefront. So I'm placing that at about a 6. Grammatical accuracy, I think it's also about a 6, but again, please slow things down and you can really show the examiner how accurate you can be in your speaking. So I thought that that would be probably about a 6. And then unfortunately, as I was mentioning before, I think the pronunciation is going to be your Achilles heel here. I'm placing that at about a 5 because there were several instances where the listener sort of loses track of what you're saying. And I don't necessarily think it's so much that your pronunciation is weak. It's more just that you speak so quickly that a lot of the words get kind of pressed together, and then it becomes difficult to kind of pick these ideas out. Okay, so my advice to you, Ijaz, is just to slow your pace down and control things in a way that ensures that your listener is understanding your message 100%, because that's exactly what you need. You do not want to walk out of that examination room with your examiner going, "What did that guy, just say?" That's not going to be helpful to us at all. Okay, so I'm thinking the overall band would be about a 5.5. Thanks very much for that, Ijaz. Okay, now here is Yasmin's submission.
The person I would like to talk about is not the Queen of England, neither is that person a world leader. But trust me when I tell you this, that person is a lot more than that. Why do I sound so confident? Well, that's because that person is a breast cancer survivor, a widow, and a mother of 3 children. You can shortly say that person is the definition of inspiration. That person is my mother. My mother decided to forget all the fear and the pain and the agony that she's going through in her life, and to focus on raising her children, and to prove to the whole world that a woman can do a lot more than it can imagine. She decided to stand up against cancer. She decided to stand up against the fear of losing anything more in her life. My mother made the very strong decision to fight. I believe that was the best decision she ever made in her life. That's because she changed my life and my brother's life, and everyone who looks up to her, or everyone who knows her, their lives changed as well. And I believe that what she did will actually be a story that will be passed on for generations and generations, because it's a story worth telling. It's a lesson worth learning. And believe me when I tell you this, she proved to me that I can break my limits, that I can change the world if I want to, if I just stand up for what I believe in. The result of that, as you can see, here I am, trying this IELTS test and hoping for the best. But I'm giving it my all, and just trying my best, just like my mother did. And as you can notice now, that no matter what the hurricane, how the hurricane was strong, you can always fight back. Thank you.
Okay, very nice response there, Yasmin. I think that that you're strong in all areas, and I hope that you are delivering that candidly. I'm not sure if you were reading it from a paper or not, but if you weren't, it was an excellent response, I think, from start to finish. So there's a lot of structure there. You have a very poetic opening, which I'm not sure how realistic it would be doing that in the examination. I mean, if you could do that, that's fine. But I thought that was okay. And you clearly respond to the task. So you mentioned that your mother's decision to fight resulted in strength sort of spreading throughout your family, and that comes across very clearly. And I think that the speed, the pace that you use to deliver your response, the vocabulary, the colloquialisms, I think it all works very, very well. And it sounds as though you might have spent quite a bit of time in an English-speaking country, because your pronunciation is really bang on. And if I'm not sure what your background is, but your pronunciation is sounding very, very well there. So good job. Now let me just provide a bit of feedback in the 4 different categories. So for fluency and coherence, I thought this was about a band 8. So it was accurate. you spoke, and you didn't, have to provide any real self-correction. I think there was one point there when you were trying to come up with the phrase "giving it my all," where there's a little bit, but that even for a native English speaker that could happen. So I thought that was very, very strong, and you were coherent through the entire thing. So that's good. Okay, lexical resources I thought were also quite strong. I placed those at about an 8 or 8.5 even. Very strong. Lots of, like I mentioned before, colloquialisms. You use idiomatic language, and you're just very natural about it all. It sounds like you're very comfortable with it. It comes out without too much effort on your side, and that definitely comes across with the listener. So I think that's a very strong area for you. Grammatical range and accuracy, I think you could honestly place a perfect 9 here, so either 8.5 or 9. I thought that there really isn't anywhere where the examiner can pick out mistakes. So, and again, if this is candid on your part, that is wonderful. But I'm not sure. Maybe if there's a bit of a script going on there, I have no idea. I'm not sure. But I hope that you were delivering it candidly. So grammar 8.59, good job. Pronunciation, again, I would score this at about an 8.5. I think that that your pronunciation is good. You have great intonation. You seem to be able to fly through the various idiomatic language that you use, and you intonate these phrases correctly. And so I think that right across the board, it's a very, very good response. So I think you can expect to get at least 8 using in delivering a response like that. And my honest guess would be about an 8.5, I think, for that. Okay, and that's all I have to say about that. So, okay, thank you for that submission, Yasmin. Now let's go to Kruxnik. And Kruxnik, I remember you from the essays contest that we held just this past week as well. So let's listen to your response.
Today I would like to talk about a person who made a good decision. So this person is my mom, who is a very, very lovely person. But bad thing is that she's living alone right now. That's because I'm living and working in Warsaw, and I don't have that much time to visit her like on every weekend. So a few weeks ago there was her friend coming from Australia to spend all summer in my hometown. And at the beginning he couldn't find any place to rent, and then he asked my mom if she could rent a room for him, but at the beginning my mom didn't want to do that. After a while she have decided, and I think that is a very good decision, because right now she has a company just to talk or go for parties. So not like before, my mom started to go for parties like on every weekend, and I can see that she's much more happy person than before. Another good point of this decision is that Oleg is from Australia, and he told me that he will help me whenever I could come to Melbourne, in Australia. So right now, as a result, I'm trying to pass the IELTS exam, because I always wanted to move to Australia, and now I have a very nice possibility of doing that. And it's all thanks to my mom's decision. Thank you.
Okay, Kruxnik, I think there were several positive things going on there. So for one, you clearly understood the task. You were able to pinpoint a decision that your mother made, and how this had a positive effect upon you. And I think that the way that you kind of tie everything together at the end is also quite strong. So there's a lot of good things going on in terms of your ability to kind of develop a response and deliver that response to fulfill what the task itself is asking. I think your main challenge is grammar. So as I pointed out in the essay that you wrote, I noticed several areas where you're missing articles. So I mean, one of the first sentences you say is that your mother is very lovely person, when it should be a very lovely person. And there were other instances like that as well. One thing I will warn you about is I had to re-listen to a part of the conversation a couple of times to pick out that you said I'm living and working in Warsaw, and you might not want to just breeze through that sort of sentence, because when it got to the whole working in Warsaw, it almost kind of crunched and sounded like it was one big word. So just try to pace yourself a little bit more, enunciate city names and places to ensure that the listener is kind of keeping up with what you're saying. Okay, I'll just point out a few areas where the grammar needs a bit of improvement. So you said, I don't have much time to visit her like on every weekend. And so the preposition we want to use there is, so for British English, it would be at every weekend, or actually at every weekend would be the best choice there. And then at another point you say, a few weeks ago, there was her friend coming from Australia. So I think the little mix up of tenses there. A few weeks ago, her friend came from Australia. Another part, there is, at the beginning, my mom didn't wanted to do that. And so you just have to be careful with your negatives. So we use the base form of the verb after a negative, so didn't want. And then another couple of issues. So right now she has a company just to talk or go for parties. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting into another area of my commentary. I wanted to talk a bit about incoherence because I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, and it could just be that there's a lexical resource issue there, and that it's leading to some incoherence. But so I didn't know what that sentence meant. There's another sentence here. Okay, towards the end there was something about I can see she's much more happy person, and of course we would want to phrase it, she's a much happier person. So anyway, a couple areas there that you'll want to touch on, but as I said before, the structure of the overall response was quite good. Now let's go through the 4 breadths. So for fluency and coherence, I would place this at about a 6 because unfortunately there is some incoherence at times, and I think that this is mainly due to grammar issues. And then unfortunately what happens is when your grammar starts to falter, it affects other parts of your speaking as well. So the lexical resources will start to go, and then the overall meaning will start to go, and then so that's what happens. The listener starts to sort of lose track of what you're saying at times. So I place that at about a 6. Now if we look at lexical resources themselves, I thought that you seem capable of talking about topics at length, and you did use several key pieces of vocab that I thought they fit quite well into the response. So I'm also placing that at about a 6. When it comes to grammar, I would place this at about a 5.5, and I think this is being a little bit generous because there were some areas, like I mentioned, the listener loses track of what you're saying. And then for pronunciation, I place this at about a 6. So most of the words the listener can pick out, and when I say most, I mean just over 50%, but there are several areas of the speaking where the listener has to sort of strain and really focus on what the overall message is, and then they have to infer what it is you're trying to say. So you don't want your examiner to be doing that when they're listening to you. So I'm placing this at about a 6 as well. So overall, I believe your performance is about a band 6. Okay, thanks for that submission. Now, there was one more, which the student didn't connect it to this thread. They posted it back one section here. Okay, Shri Kumar. Now, Shri Kumar's submission, unfortunately, the recording quality is quite low, and it's so low to I imagine that if I were to play it for you here, you wouldn't be able to pick it up. I had to put my headphones on and listen to it that way to be able to make out what was being said. So I'm just going to share my comments. I'm not going to play the recording itself, but so Shri Kumar, I think unfortunately the poor recording quality is also going to affect the mark a little bit because there was quite a bit of incoherence, and I think it was a little bit of a mix of two things. One was just the recording quality itself, and the second was there were actually some areas in your speaking where I lost track of what it was you were trying to say. So now I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay. when it comes to grammar, please watch your plurals. I noticed in several different areas you should have used a plural noun when you just used a singular noun. There was some talk at the beginning. The person you chose was also your mother, and you were sharing about, you know, the way she looks physically. So she's very tall. She has a good complexion, and I'm just not sure how much this is in keeping with what the task is asking of you. So you might want to maybe edit this and maybe take this out actually, because you don't want to spend 30 seconds talking about that when you know you're kind of you're diverging away from what your response should be focusing on. So if I go through the different breadths, I thought that your fluency and coherence placed at about a 5. So unfortunately, there were several areas where, you know, I had to listen several times over, and I still really couldn't get exactly what it is you wanted to say. And then, like I said before, I'm sure the recording, you know, factored into that as well. Your grammatical accuracy, I believe, is about a 6. So you seem to be able to, lexical resources were a 6. You use a lot of different vocab to describe the decision, to talk about your mother and the results that the decision had on you and the family. So I thought that was quite good, and you seem to use it quite naturally. So it's not like you're straining or looking for the words. There were some inaccuracies at points, and I think a lot of that was also due to perhaps it felt like the response was a little bit rushed. So sometimes the words can get, you know, mashed together a little bit. Your grammatical accuracy, I place it at about a 6.5. I think it's actually quite good. And when I listen really closely, I can tell that you're structuring your sentences properly. It's just I'd appreciate a bit more pacing and maybe a bit more effort on intonation and ensuring that the message is getting across. So you don't have to say, you know, everything in the shortest period of time possible. You just need to ensure that your listener is with you along the way. So I gave you about a 6.5 for that. Pronunciation, I'm placing at about a 5, and I just felt that a lot of it, unfortunately, kind of gets mashed together. As I was saying, it's difficult at times to pick out individual words, and like I was saying before, I had to go back and listen a couple times to the recording to ensure that I understood what it was you were saying. So I would place the overall response at about a 5.5 or 6, and I think it's probably about a 6, because I think that your, you know, the distortion that was in the recording itself, it didn't help anything. So I would imagine that this is placing around that area. Okay, so that concludes my comments for the speaking contest. Thank you to those of you that got involved, and I'm hoping to hold another one in the next couple of weeks, so please stay tuned for that. Thanks everyone, have a nice evening.